Hey Josiah, it's Dr. Scott. I have some feedback for you on your rhetorical analysis draft. Just a quick reminder of what I'm looking for in the revision. I'm looking for a thesis statement that's focused and addresses the use of rhetoric in the text that you're analyzing. I'm also looking for supporting evidence, so you're using research, you're using examples from the letter to support your argument. Also looking for research that's credible, that helps you make your case. It's not just used for context, but it's included throughout the body paragraphs to help you make your argument for why you thought the speech or the letter was particularly persuasive or not. I'm looking also for focused paragraphs and then organization and transitions, that you're placing ideas in a purposeful way and using transitions to explain how the ideas are connected. So there's a lot that's going on with this assignment. I may not get to everything. I think that you've got a good start. This is a good draft. There's definitely work to do between now and the revision, so I'm going to kind of focus on that. I want to start with the introduction, and I really like the way that you're going about the introduction. Right now, it seems like people have kind of missed in their drafts the importance of audience, and you've really kind of explained the context behind the audience. Like, why is he writing to these clergy members in Alabama? So the introduction was super helpful in kind of setting that up. It's one of the better introductions that I've read, definitely with respect to Martin Luther King's letter, where we have work to do in the body paragraphs to do some reminding and kind of connecting back to this idea of the audience. But here in the intro, I think you're doing a decent job. I did think that the movement between the rest of the body paragraph to the thesis statement, it was pretty clunky. It was jarring. It kind of came out of nowhere. I think there's different ways that you can kind of go about that. So King's lawyers help smuggle out bits. I didn't know about that. That's pretty awesome. And also, where is this information coming from? I think you need to kind of cite your sources. So maybe you do need to include some citations up here, some in-text citations. Anyhow, going from that to the lawyers and how they helped get the letter out to Martin Luther King's, like, we're into ethos, pathos, logos, and all that fun stuff. I think we need a sentence here that kind of connects the two. So it might be King put a lot of attention and care and detail in trying to persuade his audience, and worked really hard to persuade his audience. I don't know. You need something that goes from here to here, because right now it's a pretty big gap. Okay, in the paper, so in the body paragraphs, I wasn't sure why ideas were placed in the location that you had them. This is a draft, and I'm totally fine with you just kind of like getting ideas out there. Definitely a proponent of the shitty first draft. So you're just kind of getting ideas down on the page. I'm fine with that. For the revision, though, there needs to be a reason why you are placing ideas in the location that you have them. Just saying that King starts here, that's not really, you're not summarizing his speech. You're doing an analysis. So maybe if you thought he was very persuasive, you might say, I think that King was most persuasive when he was doing this, or his use of credibility opened up. It was an essential first task because it opened up the ability for him to use other rhetorical appeals and other rhetorical tactics, whatever. But right now, just saying that he started here, that's not good enough. There should be a reason why you're starting here. I love this reminder. King appeals to his credibility by comparing himself. This is important because it's addressed to white clergymen of Birmingham. Hallelujah, no pun intended. I'm seeing this here, that's great, and I'm celebrating that here. It's something that you need to do throughout, though, because sometimes you like leave me hanging and kind of say, yep, that was persuasive, or you just say that was pathos, and then you don't explain why it was pathos, and then you don't explain why that use of emotion or that emotional appeal was particularly persuasive to that audience. So this kind of stuff, that is some baller stuff right there, but it needs to be throughout the essay. Okay, so here we are talking about credibility. And I felt like this didn't really kind of do it in terms of like explaining why that's an appeal to credibility. So there's kind of like a pattern to think about here. Provide an example explain how that example is ethos, pathos, logos, or use of the memory canon, or whatever you're doing. So example, explain it, and then connect it to the audience. And then use another example to kind of explain, and then talk about how the examples might be different, and then go through that same pattern. Explain it, connect it to the audience. I love that you're using multiple examples per paragraph, but I'm not always getting the explanation afterwards. So I don't necessarily understand how this is a ethos appeal, and then I also don't understand how specifically it's an ethos appeal for that audience, and then I'm not hearing you explain much about why in particular it was persuasive. So why is this ethos? Why is it persuasive to the audience? That's something that needs to happen throughout the body paragraphs. So it was something I saw throughout the body paragraphs. I think I can kind of piece together why this might be relevant for that audience that you've identified, the white clergy members. You need to make that case. Down here, I was kind of lost. I wasn't sure why him mentioning that he has experience leading a civil rights organization, why that is going to be persuasive to folks at that time, white folks at that time. I mean, this is like what King was doing was like Black Lives Matter now. And the way people think about Black Lives Matter, like people are pretty polarized about it. It was the same way that people thought about the Christian Leadership Conference. So him touting this stuff, it was a risk. And it might be something where you say, you know what, this was a liability. Like by playing this up and basing his credibility on this may not have been something that these folks necessarily saw as persuasive. So I wasn't sure where you were going with this. I did not understand how you were seeing this as an appeal to credibility, and I did not understand how it was an appeal to credibility that worked for this particular audience. So the first example, that could work. Again, you're going to have to explain it, but down here, this one, I'm a little lost. Not to say that it can't be. Maybe he's demonstrating that he is very active and he's very committed, and that alone would appeal to his credibility in some ways. You might be able to spin it that way, Josiah, but right now it's falling a bit flat, and I'm not sure how it's working as credibility for this particular audience that you've identified. When we go on to the next paragraph about emotion, the transition was a little uneven. It feels like you're kind of like listing things like, I'm just going to start with ethos and then go to pathos. There needs to be a more purposeful reason why you're going from one to the other. A pro tip, though, with writing about emotion is to name the emotion. You're absolutely right. He uses emotional appeals, and he uses them so effectively. But name the emotion, explain why it's an emotional appeal, and then explain why it works for a particular audience. That's really the pattern to use for a paragraph about pathos. So the example that you have up here, the anesthetizing security of stained glass windows. Holy shit, that's a great image. Stained glass and being anesthetized, that means that you're under, like you're going for an operation and they put you under so they can work on you. That means you're not feeling anything. So he's saying that you people don't feel anything. You're just behind these stained glass windows and you don't feel anything. Man, what is the emotion that he's trying to get out of them? Guilt? Shame? Yeah, there's something there. Name the emotion. It's not in here yet. And then explain why that emotion is particularly persuasive to this audience. So here, the emotion that you mentioned, I think, was fear. I don't know, maybe. You'll need to explain that. Yeah, you definitely have to explain that. I mean, they might fear that they're going to lose their following, and I get you there. That might be the reason to speak. Maybe that's the argument against what King is trying to do here. So maybe you're trying to say that King wasn't all that persuasive because he didn't take that into account. If that's the case, you need to get that in there, make that clear. But really, what is the emotion that he's trying to use? Does it work? And it maybe you can argue it doesn't. I'm open to that. Like, these aren't perfect texts. So I mean, give it a think that through. What's the emotion? Why is that particularly persuasive to this audience? I was a bit lost towards the end of this paragraph. I wasn't sure I wasn't sure what emotion we were kind of working with here. Um, I guess guilt, shame. Again, you need to name them. You need to explain why they're particularly persuasive to that audience. I think there's nothing written in stone about writing about all three rhetorical appeals. You could write it about just two. You could have multiple paragraphs about emotion. I'm totally fine with that. I think you have your head around credibility. You need to follow through and explain things a bit more. So maybe you choose credibility and logic, or credibility and emotion, or something like that. But there's nothing to say that you have to write one body paragraph about each of these rhetorical appeals. The connection was also kind of weak here to the logic paragraph. Again, I'm not sure. I felt like the logic paragraph was maybe the weaker link. I felt like you really needed to kind of explain why is this logic, and again, why is that use of logic particularly persuasive to these folks? I kept asking myself with a lot of these body paragraphs, or a lot of in these examples of logic. I definitely agree with you though. They could be appeals to logic, but I'm not seeing it just yet. And I think the missing link here really is connecting things back to that audience. So I agree with you. When the letter went out, as people read it, it helped describe how to differentiate just and unjust laws, thus leading them to understand some of the injustices of Birmingham. So it's a really kind of, I'm not saying it's easy, but he's saying there are two categories here. There's just laws, there's unjust laws. And they might be laws, but if they're unjust, and you're kind of using that as a shield to not get involved with the civil rights movement, like, you're lacking a kind of like a moral backbone. So yeah, that kind of like, it's this or this, using that logic, it could be really persuasive. You could also say maybe it's really divisive. So wherever you want to go with that. So really kind of explaining why is that persuasive or useful or unpersuasive to a particular audience, that needs to happen here. So again, that's me repeating for over 12 minutes now. You need to connect things back to the audience. That's the TLDR version of this whole thing. So Josiah, I'm sorry, this is a super long video, but I'm kind of fired up about the speech. I love the examples that you're using. Just need to follow through on kind of explaining how those are working to persuade and who they're working to persuade. That's really, and also you need to get the research in here, partner. But you've got a solid skeleton here to work with. Okay, you got questions? Let me know. Be happy to help you out. All right, that's it for now.